With an air of pomposity and class superiority, several studies published by leftist media outlets crow. People that give in to conservatism may simply be dumb. You've all seen these studies that ever purport to categorically prove that high intelligence equals leftist politics and normal to lower intelligence equates to people that trend socially to the right. They say, with no irony, that the empirical evidence supports this link. They trumpet that low intelligence and low effort thinking are strongly linked to right-wing attitudes, including conservative politics. And if you agree with conservative politics, it then, according to these studies, follows that you will also be inclined to be prejudiced and maybe even racist. For those that lack a cognitive ability to grasp the complexities of our world, strict right-wing ideologies may be more appealing. To begin with, let's just say the findings of this study are true. It wouldn't really surprise me. Over the years, I've come to believe that the truth tends to be supported by the average man and the very smart man, or woman for that matter. It's the ones that have had 17 plus years at the indoctrination centers we call schools that are desperate to be part of the social mainstream that you have to worry about. Your average person just sees what's in front of them and accepts it for what it is, and the very intelligent person understands that sometimes the simple explanation really is how things are. IQ has been used for decades to measure intelligence. However, according to the left, intelligence, like gender, is a social construct. And for that matter, so is race. You can't use IQ to categorize a whole group of people when it suits your purposes, but then at the same time ignore it when it does not conform to your worldview. Because if racism is a social construct, it has to be learned, and we've been told this time and time again. But now, if racism is not a learned behavior, but genetic, as a large percent of IQ is understood to be inherited, then how much and how often will the narrative shift in order to accommodate the mental gymnastics it takes to be a modern adherent to the leftist principles, especially for anyone over 30 years of age? In fact, I would say there are probably very, very few actual racists. People that unquestionably hate another person because of the color of their skin or shape of their eye is probably close to zero. This is why you'll find so-called advocates advocating disingenuous and particularly ludicrous ideas like microaggressions, where a person does not even know that they're being racist, to the need to segregate from others in safe spaces so that their echo chambers are not disrupted and disturbed by the vileness of an opposing idea. People will quickly notice that Italians are, for example, very emotive, while Koreans tend to be more introspective. Not all of them by any means, but there is an obvious and general trend. No one dislikes another for their skin tone. It's because of their behavior. People notice patterns, whether we like to admit it or not, and as soon as the pattern changes, people's attitudes will change accordingly. Majority characteristics are a guideline, but for the vast majority of people, they're not the rule. The brain is a pattern recognition machine, and perhaps most people, as well as the very intelligent, just use a simpler and more efficient heuristic. Mahatma Gandhi is known for many things today, but being a racist isn't one of them. But he had very clear opinions of South African blacks at the turn of the 20th century that mostly were concerned with his own observations. He strongly believed that this group of people had a lackadaisical work ethic and lacked the mental faculties of his ethnic group, Indians. I very much doubt, though, Gandhi would have called himself a racist, and I very much doubt he hated black people for the color of their skin. His impression of this group of people was not based on ignorance, but on a deep immersion of 21 years living in Africa. But according to the current and accepted discourse, Gandhi, and as a matter of fact the current official king of the South African Zulu tribe, who is also of the same opinion, do not recognize patterns, but are low-effort thinkers who both lack the cognitive ability to grasp the complexities of their world. And they're both blasphemers in a world that is drowning in emotionalism and divorced from real politic and responsibility. In fact, the imperative to not judge any group of people for anything or by anything is a social phenomenon that only arose in the late 20th century, and singularly in the West. Therefore, basically everyone who lived before the mid-1960s was a low IQ, low effort thinker, according to most mainstream academics and gatekeepers of what is currently socially accepted discourse. A lot of the social codes that people, and at times rightly, abide by have nothing to do with intelligence or education, but of how plugged into the system they are, as this ups the ante in what they have to lose by going against any of the current and continually changing set of values in the West. It also depends on where a person's group fits on the totem of victimhood as to whether they'll wear a scarlet letter for the rest of their days should they err and go off script. And if they do, there's a lot to lose. They can lose social capital, social acquaintances. They can be bullied and harassed and have their very livelihood destroyed. In short, they've got a lot to lose. This is why social narratives on a variety of issues can be so easily morphed, as the political and media classes have very little in the way of scruples or any real strong set of beliefs. This is doubly the case with the demise of religion and specifically the Christian church in the West. It doesn't matter if you believe in God or not. There's no denying that religion is a key component in the glue that holds societies together. Our experiment with non-state, widespread irreligiousness is a first in human history, and the fruits, even when looking at intact families and birth rates, does not bode well for this civilizational model. The so-called educated and professional classes easily shift with the prevailing fads that blow in on the social winds without much in the way of a moral compass. And current so-called Western values have very shallow roots and for the most part have no history to them. Case in point is the breathtaking speed and I would add needed change with regards to homosexuality and its social acceptance. Homosexuality has gone from being strictly illegal to socially accepted in a matter of decades. While not necessarily all aspects of the gay lifestyle is universally loved, the hypersexualization of pride parades, for example, homosexuals have basically gone from pariah to boring neighbor in the blink of an eye. Homosexuals have always been with us, and to acknowledge this simply makes sense. However, this doesn't mean that every social situation is the same or equivalent. The current policy across the Western world that's being instituted by the upper classes is without regards for the wishes or concerns of a significant number of their fellow countrymen. This is why it's the so-called coarse, working-class rabble that come out first against the rapid and irreversible changes that are happening across the West, since they are living the multicultural failure, dream, every single day, and since they have little to lose being openly hostile, as it will have little impact on their lives. So they do. And they're mocked for being ill-educated, so none of their concerns matter, and their worldview based on their experience, as well as their very person, is classified, as Gandhi would be, as low-effort thinkers, being ignorant. In all reality, if having views that are not leftist is seen by academics, the media, and the educated classes as entailing stupidity, this basically tells you who has a monopoly on what is truth and what is acceptable discourse in our societies. If you define intelligence as education, and your centers of academia are basically leftist indoctrination centers, complete with speech codes and safe spaces, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand the kind of people that will come out of these institutions. But if academia, as well as the media, two thoroughly almost Marxist institutions, believe that IQ is not only inherited, but is a reliable indicator of a person's political predilections, and that a low IQ is the reason for a person to not understand the intricacies of the world, and this in turn makes him a racist, well, then there's a lot of explaining to do. That would then make Australian Aborigines, on average, the most politically conservative as well as racist-leaning groups of people on Earth, according to the same survey and their group's average IQ. And sub-Saharan Africans would also have some of the most conservative and racist societies based on their group's average IQ. So by nations, East Asians and the Japanese in particular would be the most welcoming to foreigners, as their median IQ places them as among the most intelligent people on Earth. Therefore, with such high general IQs, they should be extremely liberal, as well as welcoming massive influxes of people from unrelated cultures. Yes, this is literally what the Western cabal of government, media, and academia are espousing, even though it flies in the face of reality. And yes, delusions die hard. Enter Satoshi Kanazawa, an evolutionary psychologist at the London School of Economics. When he's not getting himself in trouble by writing papers on the evolutionary reasons for beautiful and ugly women, he has now weighed in on intelligence and its evolutionary utility in a study published in the peer-reviewed scientific journal Social Psychology Quarterly. He advances a new theory that intelligent people are significantly more likely to exhibit social values and religious and political preferences that are novel to the human species in evolutionary history. Evolutionarily novel preferences and values are those that humans are not biologically designed to have and our ancestors probably did not possess. In contrast, those that our ancestors had for millions of years are evolutionarily familiar. He expanded on these ideas in his book, The Intelligence Paradox, Why the Intelligent Choice Isn't Always the Smart One. He argues that humans are evolutionarily designed to be conservative, caring mostly about their family and friends, and that being liberal, caring about an indefinite number of genetically unrelated strangers they've never met or will interact with, is evolutionarily novel. Kanazawa defines liberalism for the purposes of his book as the concern for non-genetically related others and the providing of resources to them. No human groups, whether in the environment of evolutionary adaptation or up to nearly the present, have been liberal. On the contrary, they've been concerned only about the members of their own groups. Likewise, no human groups have ever, on the whole, been atheistic. They've all been religious. Kanazawa found that the only evidence for a significant amount of atheism was in formerly communist societies. Another way of saying all of this is that it appears that human beings are hardwired by evolution to be conservative and theistic. These novel preferences would also then only work within a society if they are broadly accepted by all groups, which categorically they are not. And this is where the trouble therein lies. Kanazawa provides abundant evidence for those of higher IQ engaging in evolutionary novel behavior and beliefs. For those who wonder how modern Western societies can advocate policies and hold beliefs that manifestly harm themselves, look no further than the fact that the highly intelligent are the ones in charge. From those that claim to be the betters of the less intelligent, you'll hear slogans like, "It's the current year, therefore our ideologies are correct and will be for the remainder of human civilization." Or, one of my favorites, "We're on the right side of history." This is called Whig history. Google it. It's a continuation of this leftist cabal's strategy to make it seem as though everyone supports their dogma and political positions. This is a very simple and classic psychological campaign that targets the basic human desire not to be ostracized. And it works marvelously on your average educated and intelligent person. They don't care if what is being espoused is right or wrong. Most are only concerned that they'll be able to maintain their social status and position and not be ostracized. The actual narrative is irrelevant. Gender is fluid. Health at any size. Intelligence is a construct, but not when it suits our worldview. Ableism, the patriarchy. Islam is a religion of peace and tolerance. As I said, these current values in the great social experiment that is the West have very, very shallow roots. But the very intelligent are also capable of learning from experience. In the Anglosphere, as well as most other Western countries, a fair percentage of the very rich and very intelligent vote conservative, whilst the poor and the educated ideologues vote left. It's the people in the middle, people of moderate intelligence, who've been trained for 17 plus years in the indoctrination centers of Western academia, who often believe ridiculous things because they have the capacity to rationalize everything. The average person, as well as the very intelligent, just don't seem capable of being so categorically insane. In fact, the very intelligent generally trend toward their own idiosyncratic nature and care very little for the ideologue's jibber-jabber. Mozart, one of the greatest composers of all time, a genius and a scat aficionado. Newton, after establishing his credentials as a man of science, then went on to become obsessed with his search for God. Gandhi, again, who loved enemas so much he performed them twice daily. It's also said that he would sleep nude with several little girls to test his strength as a celibate. And Tesla, who rightly loved pigeons. In fact, of one particular pigeon, he said, "I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman, and she loved me. As long as I had her, there was a purpose to my life." Even at the end of this presentation, I'm not sure whether academia considers IQ a social construct or not. And if IQ makes one a racist, then racism is not learned but a part of the human psyche. And how do you fight that? The doublethink that this rabbit hole dives into is mind-numbing cognitive dissonance, which seems to suit your average modern leftist social justice warrior, as it does take some serious mental acrobatics to convince yourself of things that don't initially appear to be true or even plausible. Times have changed. It's now counterculture not to be a wild leftist, living in a state of constant mental anxiety while holding mutually contradictory core values and beliefs. Academia and the media demean and rubbish the interests of a wide swath of the population using IQ, while at the same time holding that IQ is not a reliable indicator of a country's potential to develop. The so-called educated classes, which incidentally are mostly made up of indoctrinated automatons that have spent 4+ years in degree mills, seek to muzzle anyone and everyone that may still believe they have interests. All people have interests. It's just those that shout the loudest and have the most say currently in society that claim that interests, whether economic, social, educational, geographical, financial, cultural, linguistic, or even the dreaded ethnic, everyone has interests, and not just the latte-swilling liberal arts student working on her dissertation in queer gender studies. And even those with less education and those with lower IQ have interests. To be told they don't smacks of classism and eugenics at its finest. In 100 years, Japan will still be Japan. She'll retain her culture, her language, her social customs. The same with China, South Korea, and even Saudi Arabia. Yes, Western countries like Germany, France, Holland, Canada, and Sweden will still exist in 100 years, at least geographically, but in what form? And will a radically morphed Sweden be a better Sweden, or will it be a nightmare? The West is currently a giant laboratory for the greatest experiment in human history. The evolutionarily novel policies, using Kanazawa's phrase here, are dictating the direction and future of our entire civilization. But who has given these people the right to use our cultural and social inheritance, built up over centuries, as a guinea pig with no certainty of outcome? Oh, that's right, we did. We're just too busy and too distracted by other things to pay attention. And while we were looking away, we've come to a point where to defend our interests makes us not only bad people, but intellectually diminished. And for those that have created the policies that have broken the social contract throughout much of the West, they don't seem to realize, even with their peer-reviewed and certified intelligence, that they can no longer fool their narcoleptic citizenry. We have interests as people, families, communities, nations, and as a civilization. If I and those like me are low-effort thinkers for recognizing this simple truth, then so be it. If this kind of material resonates with you, please click like, and even better, if you'd like to see more of this kind of material, please click the subscribe button.